If you're looking for the real purpose behind the continuation of a war that's lasted 18 months and shows no signs of stopping, I would suggest you don't waste your time charting the twists and turns of Netanyahu's relationship with Ben Gvir or Smotrich. You can discount, too, any serious wish to get the remaining hostages back alive, or indeed any serious hope that it would wipe Hamas off the map. It knows it can't do that. I suggest you look at Israel's meticulously planned, premeditated assault on Gaza's 36 hospitals, its paramedics, its ambulances. Israel coldly calculates that if it dismantles the health system, it makes the Strip uninhabitable for over 2 million people. And it could still prove to be right. You can test this assumption in a number of ways. Last autumn, a team of researchers from Harvard plotted the distance between Gaza's hospitals and craters formed by 2,000-pound M84 bombs. These are bombs that the Biden temporarily blocked and that Trump have now resupplied in earnest. An M84 bomb can displace 5 tons of dirt and pancake entire buildings. The paper noted that during the first 6 weeks of the conflict, 84% of Gaza's hospitals were within damage range of at least one crater, and 1/4 were within lethal range. So a physician asked Clayton Dalton, a US doctor who entered Gaza 2 weeks after the January ceasefire, how could you be using these kinds of weapons in this kind of setting and still argue you're adhering to international humanitarian law? Dropping more bombs on Gaza in the first 2 months than was dropped on London, Dresden and Hamburg during the whole of the Second World War turns out to be the least of it. The campaign to dismantle Gaza's healthcare system started on October the 17th, just 10 days after the Hamas attack. A devastating explosion took place in the car park of Al-Ahi Hospital in Gaza City. The Gaza Health Ministry reported that 471 people were killed and 342 people injured, while US intelligence agencies put the number at between 100 and 300. At any rate, the blast was big enough to derail Joe Biden's visit the next day to the region. He had to cancel the Jordan leg of his trip as a result. Now, the first reaction by Israeli officials was to deny responsibility. They said a failed rocket launch by Hamas or Islamic Jihad was responsible for a missile veering off course. They said a salvo of 17 rockets fired from within Gaza were all fired in the direction of the hospital, and one of them was responsible for the blast in the car park. The Israeli military spokesman, Peter Lerner, appeared on CNN and BBC pointing to a still of an Al Jazeera live stream showing a mid-air explosion and claiming this footage was that of the misfiring rocket. These and other more sophisticated lies, like an alleged audio tape of 2 Arab voices talking about the rocket, they turned out to have accents which were not from Gaza, were quickly unraveled by forensic architecture, Earshot and Al-Haq, which formed the content of a Channel 4 documentary. But the Israeli tactic worked. Sow enough disinformation and get it spread throughout the world, and Biden will continue to supply your Air Force with those M84 bombs. Al-Ahli showed that Israel can target a hospital against every war convention in existence to which it itself is signatory and get away with it. No one blinked. 6 days before, at the Labour Party conference, Keir Starmer told LBC that Israel had the right to withhold water from Gaza, a line he never apologised for publicly, even after the hospital attack. Israel's right to exact the worst collective punishment on a civilian population since Srebrenica became firmly entrenched in the status quo that exists to this day. It's become normal to kill 30 or 100 civilians a night. After the first 2 massacres took place at Al-Shifa, Ehud Barak, former Prime Minister, who poses as a peacenik, went on Newsnight to claim that Hamas's headquarters were in the basement under the hospital, and he knew about this basement because Israeli engineers had built it. These claims, again, could not stand serious scrutiny from independent foreigners who had worked in these hospitals. I recommend that everyone reads a really stunning account of a walkthrough of what remains of the hospital system of Gaza by a US doctor in the New Yorker. In the following passage, Clayton Dalton describes his visit to the Indonesian hospital. He writes, "We entered a large storage room in the corner of an ICU, which was crammed with medical devices, ultrasound machines, IV pumps, dialysis machines, blood pressure monitors. Each had been apparently destroyed by a bullet, not in a pattern one would expect from random shooting, but rather methodically. I was stunned. I couldn't think of any possible military justification for destroying life-saving equipment. When I asked the IDF for comment, a spokesperson said, claims that the IDF deliberately targets medical equipment are unequivocally false. Another claim was made to have found a stash of weapons near an MRI room in a hospital. As any radiologist will tell you, that machine functions with a powerful magnet. No metal object can be allowed anywhere near it, otherwise it disables it. Today, Israel has stopped even bothering to say that Hamas are using hospitals as human shields. Bombing hospitals, columns of ambulances, targeting emergency responders has become an internationally tolerated norm. In Lebanon, as we all see from the film we are about to see, Israel bombed 40 hospitals, 8 of whom were forced to close, and 249 emergency vehicles were damaged. Hundreds of workers were killed. Western governments continue to dance a ballet around this fact. This dance allows them to express deep concern without for one moment stopping to supply Israel with the technology, the intelligence, or the weapons it needs to continue the war. Just listen to the reply a British minister gave to a question from a Liberal MP, Tom Morrison, on the 22nd of April this year. Asked by Morrison whether the government supported international legal action, referrals to the ICC against people responsible for violations of international humanitarian law, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for the Middle East, Hamish Faulkner, replied, "The UK is appalled at the recent killings of aid workers and health workers in Gaza. In our diplomatic engagement with the government of Israel and at the UN Security Council, we've called on Israel to conduct thorough investigations to all incidents involving aid workers and medical personnel and ensure accountability for those responsible." Did his boss, the Foreign Secretary David Lammy, ensure accountability of Gideon Saar, the Israeli Foreign Minister, whom he hosted in London recently? He's a senior member of the Israeli government and part of the cabinet that decided to break the ceasefire agreement with Hamas signed in January. Faulkner went on to say that Britain respected the independence of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and it was for the ICC prosecutor, having reviewed the evidence, to determine independently who should be prosecuted in accordance with his mandate under the Rome Statutes. But when the ICC prosecutor did just that for Netanyahu and the then Defence Minister Gallant, Britain's reaction was to ignore the ruling. Will Faulkner's deep respect for the ICC mean that Britain now honours its obligations under the Rome Statute to arrest and try Netanyahu and anyone else who participated in this war under an arrest warrant that exists from the international prosecutor of the ICC? Of course it doesn't. And another thing happened during Saar's private, secret official visit to the UK, or rather it didn't happen. The UK media ignored all mention of it. The visit passed unnoticed. For Israel's actions in Gaza are only half the story. The other half is supplied by the battalions of journalists and mainstream media organisations who look the other way. There are honest journalists who do their job under impossible conditions. The Middle East Eye, I'm proud to say, now in its 11th year, could not function without them. But most news media organisations quite simply are failing to function. I've worked in a few war zones with the BBC and with Sky crews in Croatia, in Bosnia, in Russia, in Chechnya. I edited much of The Guardian's output during the Second Intifada. And I and my colleagues in the BBC did their job honourably and impartially, as we were all trying to do. We were subject to exactly the same pressures that exist now from exactly the same people. It's not in the DNA of the BBC to be this silent. I can't remember another conflict where their coverage was as incomplete as it is today. You would not know from their coverage that at this very moment, a major battle is taking place in Beit Hanun between Hamas fighters and the Israeli army, because no one's reporting it. The BBC crow that they can't report properly on Gaza or in southern Lebanon because they're not allowed in. But as you'll see from the film, reporters can get in and report, even when bombs are falling. Countless massacres have simply been relegated to a few parts in a sort of he said, she said manner. Their inaction to report the most basic stories helps shroud each massacre in a fog of war. Every time they say the health ministry is Hamas-run, or remind their audience that those figures don't make a difference between civilians and fighters, they cast doubt on a death toll which any impartial investigation has revealed is probably a gross underestimate. At least the Lancet thinks so. So when future generations ask you, when the liberal democracies lost their moral compass, when they lost their right to be heard as a moral arbiter of right and wrong, one of the answers will surely be that this happened in 2025, and it happened in Lebanon, and it happened in Gaza. Thank you for listening.